to our Talking Grief podcast. I'm your host, Rainbow Tomes, and in every episode we're going to explore how grief touches our lives, at home, at work and beyond. Today's guest is Jess Jones, founder of Secora Group, and we're going to be talking about grief in our careers. So welcome, Jess. So good to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Rainbow.
Excellent. So what brings you here to talk about career grief?
So when you first suggested I might be, a suitable guest for your
More
grief
than
podcast,
suitable, definitely.
I was a bit perplexed because I thought, I've had, some people under my leadership or throughout my career who've experienced what I had considered as typical grief, i.e. losing somebody close to you. But when I actually really explored what grief means, I realised that it's something that I come across far more regularly through all of the work I've done throughout my recruitment and headhunting and leadership career. So, that might be in the form of a candidate who has been employed in an organisation for many, many years, and through redundancy, they find themselves totally outside of their comfort zone in a really scary position that they've not been in before. It might be a female just about to have her first baby or adopt, and therefore they're taking time out of what is their natural environment and doing something they've never done before. Or it might be a business that's going through an event like an acquisition, and it's then the unknown, and therefore people could then grieve what they had before because of change.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, isn't it? Because those are like typically situations that people would automatically think about grief.
Yeah.
So what's that been like for you in your career, supporting people through those transitions and kind of witnessing that?
I think my biggest take from it all is to listen. I think that is key. And also not to treat everybody how you want to be treated. Actually understand that person and treat them how they want to be treated. I think it's not making assumptions or, it's showing empathy that you are able to create space for them and allow them to talk about how they're feeling, allow them to have those emotions, and not, sort of thinking about necessarily what my goal is, but really understanding what their goal is and what their motivations are. Perhaps giving them a bit of advice on what possibilities could be, because I think people are, especially if they've been employed for a long period of time and then they find themselves in a redundancy situation, they just don't know what opportunity could look like for them. So it's, in a safe way, giving them ideas about possibilities and holding their hand through those processes.
Because they're not easy processes to go through.
No.
Yeah. So what do you notice most in those situations of redundancy? What are people facing that is most challenging?
Well, I mean, it really, if we're talking about now the current market, because unemployment is rising, it has risen quite significantly. It's now sitting at about 5%. And there are businesses closing their doors or doing organisational restructures or going through acquisitions, which means that they might be, looking at taking stock about, what skills they already have in the business and maybe needing to cut heads in other areas. So it's not been an easy time this last, sort of year. Really, since sort of 2023, there's this increase in unemployment. So I'm finding that, people are concerned about will they find a job, especially at executive level. And I think they quite often have perhaps a little bit of time and don't realise that they could use that time in a really productive way. So some of the executives that we're working with at Secora Group who have found themselves in redundancy situations, are thinking they've got to rush. There's this real sense of urgency to find a new role. And I do understand, because they know that they can't really relax until they've found a role. But sometimes it's a really good opportunity for people to take stock, sort of recalibrate and think about what's important to them. Were they actually really happy? Did they have that feeling of satisfaction in their position before they were in a position of redundancy? There's also an opportunity to take some time to upskill. Obviously, with the rise of AI, there's an opportunity to take a bit of time that we just don't have in our day jobs to do more qualifications, and research and development and things online, like sort of self-learning, self-teaching. But I think there's a real panic from when somebody finds themselves in a redundancy situation.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking there's so many emotions. There's that kind of ending. So, how do you process that? And then, like you say, there's that panic of what am I going to do now? And also, who am I? Because it can be such a huge part of your identity, being part of, especially if you've been working for an organisation for a long period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely feelings of grief when somebody comes, to find themselves outside of the organisation, people that they've worked with for such a long time. Those relationships, they're often strong because you're with each other every day. And so there's a feeling of grief from some of the relationships that perhaps people might have considered friends that then, are no longer so prevalent in their lives because you're just not seeing them every day. So I suppose there's that realisation of knowing who your real friends are as well.
Right. Which relationships last, isn't it? And some of that can be down to time availability, but some of that might be, situational, and that kind of, and I guess again that processing of that of, okay, so when our relationship isn't going to continue, or oh great, we're going to continue.
Yeah, absolutely.
So many changes within a change.
Yeah, and I think also, and this is so prevalent in women, is the feeling of imposter syndrome, especially high achieving women who, are successful in an environment, and then once they're outside of that environment, wondering whether they have the capability to achieve again. And that learned behaviour that's been inbuilt in us, sort of giving them the fear that they can't move forward and repeat that success in another environment, which of course they are more than capable of doing.
But that vulnerability when you're in that space and you haven't got your usual support network, it's really difficult to think in that way.
Yeah.
So what would you like, to see employers do? And we know for organisations to survive that restructures, often have to happen and things like that. But what do you think employers and business leaders could do to make that process better for those employees?
Yeah. Well, there's lots of help out there, I was. Before I launched Secora Group earlier this year, I was part of another recruitment business, and often we would be asked by clients of ours, businesses who were going through a restructure, to come in and give support to people who are likely to be facing redundancy. And that could be in the form of CV writing or support to help them understand how to create a CV. Some people, haven't done it for many, many years. Understanding the job market, interviewing techniques, how to apply for jobs, and all those sorts of advice and guidance, hints and tips. So some of the sort of, more successful redundancy programs that businesses have gone through, I think if they can offer outreach support to really help those facing redundancy, that seems to go a long way. I think, as well, giving people the space and the recognizing and encouraging people to welcome their emotions is even just that recognition, and showing that empathy, that you don't know how somebody's feeling, so don't claim to, as an employer, know how these people are feeling, but it's just recognizing and letting them know that it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to feel sad. It's healthy to have emotions like sadness and fear and anger.
Right.
People need to understand that it's okay to welcome those emotions, and not try and be strong and push them away, suppress them, because that's going to cause blockages, in the future. So I think, it's that showing empathy, letting people know that it's okay to feel any way, any feeling is acceptable.
Yeah. And that, to me, just says authenticity, right? It's like that space to be authentic, and that almost expecting that people are going to experience these whole range of different emotions. And when you were sort of describing it, I was thinking there's the other added layer of what has happened before, has there been other situations where someone's gone through redundancy and had an awful experience, and then are they carrying this into this next experience? So this is why people respond so differently.
Yeah, I think we've obviously talked and covered quite a lot about redundancy, but the other thing that's worth noting is it doesn't have to be a situation like redundancy where it's outside of their control. I've also seen executives who are dissatisfied or unhappy in their current situation and make a really brave decision to leave that situation and resign, and still go through those feelings of grief.
Yeah.
I think the really important thing to remember is we actually can't, we try and control how we're feeling, but realistically, we can't control those feelings. They're emotions, you sometimes can't foresee these emotions coming. You just don't know how you're going to feel. I mean, an example, and this really, really blindsided me, something that was quite personal to me, is that I resigned from my previous company after 4 months of deliberating what, the future looked like for me, and making a pretty agonising decision. And I'll never forget the feeling I had that was completely unexpected and totally overwhelming when I resigned. So I pressed send on my resignation letter, and I cannot even explain to you the feeling that came over me. It was like somebody had died. I was hysterical. I was sobbing, almost fell to the kitchen floor, feeling so upset about it. And it just, as I say, completely blindsided me. I had no idea that I was going to feel like that. So I think you just cannot estimate how someone's going to feel.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that, because that's such an honest description of your experience. And I think it shows how something can be really exciting, but also really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And creating that space for all of those emotions rather than I should feel like this.
Yeah, you're completely right, because, you know, I made the decision to leave my long-term employment to start a really exciting new chapter. And it was something that was totally in my control. It was my decision. I thought long and hard about it. You know, it was very, you know, structured in the sort of process that I went through to make the decision. And then suddenly this overwhelming feeling of grief, like, you know, somebody had been terminally ill that I loved, and suddenly, you know, their life support had been turned off, or something. You know, that was how it felt. It's so weird to you know, try and explain it to somebody.
And that's your experience, right? That's what it was like for you. And so what's helped through that process? Because, you know, our relationship continues, you know, whether it's people, whether it's places, whether it's an organisation. So what's helped you in that transition?
So what has helped me, and what I would advise for anybody, I am a huge believer in the power of working with a coach.
Yeah.
I cannot, you know, I couldn't rate it more. And at the time that I experienced my own personal grief with exiting my previous company, I wasn't working with my coach. And probably a few weeks afterwards, and I always believe that, you know, people sort of serendipitously come into our lives. You know, an imposter syndrome specialist, you know, happened to come into my life. And I think it's just really trusting that process and having the consistent time away from all the, you know, the hustle and bustle of everyday life to work on yourself, because there is definitely, and I think it's in, you know, in everybody, most people, you know, there are definitely inner beliefs that have, you know, been inherent in us since our childhoods, that, you know, we condition ourselves to think it should be this way, or it's always got to be this way. And so I think, you know, working with a coach like yourself, Rainbow, you know, especially somebody who is an absolute expert in grief, is so important. It's been the most powerful thing that I can recommend.
Amazing. And like you said, that just having that space for you, you know, because you're working on your business, you're, you know, growing your business, but for you and your feelings and your emotions. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. So what else would you like for people to take away from your story? You know, if they were going to take away one thing, what would you like them to take? Because you've shared so much with us today.
It's a really hard question. Well, I mean, I'm on my own personal journey, and so I think probably the biggest thing to take away is learning to welcome emotions. You know, we have all sorts of emotions: sadness, anger, grief, joy. Welcome those emotions and really feel them. You know, they're not things up here, they're things in here, in your body.
Right.
And, you know, we've all been in that position where you feel really scared and you've got that knot in your tummy, or you feel sad and it's almost like a pain in your heart. And that's how it feels for me. And I'm saying that as if it's the same for everybody, and it's not. But, you know, joy, you know, you sort of, it's, for me, it's in my upper body, and it's, you know, you want to sort of jump around and things like that.
There's so much energy.
Yeah.
Let's go.
But it's welcoming those emotions, good or bad. One of the things I've started doing is journaling, writing down how I feel and feel in my body, not my head, about when good things are happening. Like, really celebrate those feelings and then not being frightened to write down the feelings that I get if I'm scared or angry or sad as well. So yeah, and all of what I've talked about, this is all new to me, and it's all things that I've learned from working with a coach. So I think that's the other thing. Explore the possibilities of working with a coach.
Amazing. And thank you for coming along today. It's so good to see you and hear about what you're up to. Thank you.
You're welcome. I've loved it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So if this episode has resonated with you, please subscribe to our Talking Grief podcast and share it with anyone you feel might find it helpful. If you need support or resources on grief in the workplace, then visit our website at www.thegriefTherapist.co.uk. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.